You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So we're going to continue our series looking at the book of Acts. And so I'm going to let Zach kind of introduce us to what we're going to talk about today.
Certainly. This week we're in Acts chapter 2, which is very familiar to, well, hopefully everybody. But if you're not familiar with Acts chapter 2, that is the day of Pentecost. That is the day in which the promised Holy Spirit arrives, at least very physically, with the flames and all of the things to the disciples who are hanging out still in the upper room. And a lot happens here. They leave the upper room with the Spirit and they go out and they begin preaching in all different kinds of languages. Everybody can understand. There's some funny things that happen that we'll get into in a little bit. Just kind of want to give you a broad overview of the disciples hanging out in the upper room, still not quite sure what to do, even after Jesus has been back in the resurrection and now he's gone, he's ascended, and they're still kind of in that, what do we do mode? They're still kind of waiting around, it seems. And then the Holy Spirit comes on this day of Pentecost with fiery tongues, and then kind of gets down into it. So Matt, when you think about Acts chapter 2, there's so much there. We focus on just kind of a couple of the things throughout the lectionary and just when we're preaching and teaching it. But what really sticks out to you here?
I think of Acts 2 and I think of Pentecost. It's actually one of my favorite Sundays in the church, because if you can do it right and you get everybody to wearing orange or red, in Oklahoma, that's a big thing. You're either a Sooner fan, which is orange or red. Oh my gosh, they're gonna murder me. Or you're a Cowboy
edit
fan.
That out. You gotta own it.
Yeah, I know. Or you're a Cowboy fan, which is orange, and so you can have some fun with that in worship. And there's just ways that can be done. It's just one of my favorite Sundays in the church. I think of the story, and I think of Acts 2, and I think of like what it would be like to be in this upper room, mind you, like not very long after like Jesus ascended. Like, what do we do next? And so then you have this moment, this sacred moment, where you get it. And that's the way I like to look at it. It's like they just get it. It's not that they understood everybody. Yeah, that happened, but like, no, they got what is to come next, and they were empowered on what is to come next. And I think that's like the key, is that the Holy Spirit, I'm doing this whole sermon series on the Holy Spirit, so I'm spending a lot of time studying the Holy Spirit right now. One of the things I've come to realize with the Holy Spirit is that it was there before. It just made itself known, and it resides on the church, and it empowers the church to then go out. And that's the one thing I love about this, is that this is when the Holy Spirit, like, it's not that we ever knew that like the Holy Spirit is throughout all of Scripture, but here the Spirit makes its presence known. And there are other places where that happens, but this time it's like a big to do.
Right. Well, and I think that's a disservice we do Pentecost, is really the Holy Spirit just in general, right? At the very least, as Methodists, this is about the only Sunday we focus on the Holy Spirit, not because we're not fans. This is just the Sunday, right? And we leave a lot to be desired, I think, when we think about the Holy Spirit only being present on Pentecost rather than throughout, because we see it throughout Scripture. Hebrew Bible, New Testament, we just see it in these spaces of the Spirit was there, right? The Spirit overcame them, the Spirit, right? And then sometimes I think we leave a lot to be desired when it's just, it's the day of Pentecost, and that's when the Holy Spirit came. And I think you're exactly right. This is the moment where they were like, oh yeah, here are all of the puzzle pieces going together of what Jesus taught us. And it hits them like a ton of bricks of, here's how we go and do this. Here's our chance in these moments. because we see it even when Jesus ascends, the Spirit comes over him, right?
Yeah.
So the Holy Spirit's there and present throughout, and I feel like we have those same revelations, those same moments in our lives where we're just kind of sitting there trying to figure out what is next, and it hits you. Oh, right, here's what it is, and we get to work, we get to move in, all the while in those little steps and the waiting and kind of preparing for the Spirit's there, the Spirit's at work and carries us through.
That's why I like that question in verse 12. They're all surprised and bewildered, and some ask each other, "What does this mean?"
Yeah.
like what does this mean? And we've all been there. We've all been in those faith situations where we've like found ourselves asking ourselves, "What does this mean? Like, what's happening here?" And I think we've even missed out on those moments of the Holy Spirit because we are so we've compartmentalized things. We've compartmentalized the Trinity in such a way that we forget that the Spirit is always at work doing something.
Right. Well, and that parlays into my favorite part of this.
I knew that'd be your favorite
Peter.
part of it. Yeah,
it's my favorite one. I just love Peter, and I just love Peter. But this willingness to lay it all out there, right? We get down in the chapter, they're preaching and teaching, and everybody's like, these guys they hit the wine a little early this morning. Peter's like, what are you talking about? It's 9 o'clock. We're not drunk. It's way too early in the morning for that. But here's what's going on, right? And I love that just they go for it, right? It hits them, they get it, and they go for it. And yeah, all the while they're asking, what does this mean? But they're not worried about what do people think. They don't have any of those what if questions of what if we go out there and do this and people think we're drunk, right? What if we go out there and do this and people reject us? What if we go out there and do this and we fail? They just go for it. They're not quite sure what it means. They're not quite sure, but they go for it. And I love that the response of the crowd around them, they're like, these guys hit the sauce a little early this morning. They've been up in that upper room. They're coming out and just, okay.
And Peter's hit with a sermon like no other. Now, great, he does a great job with this sermon. I don't think we unpack this sermon enough. I mean, like you'd said, there's a lot of quotes from Joel here, but like he actually like has a really good sermon here.
Oh, he hits the way, yeah.
Like, he I just love it. He stood with the other 11 apostles. He raised his voice and declared, and then like he just gets after it.
Yeah.
Surely there's been a time when you've done that, Zach.
Oh, 100%. I preach manuscripts, so I don't do it very often. Because we'll be there all day. But no, they're 100%, whether it's in conversation, whether it's in sermon, that it's just like, oh, here's the thing, right? And I don't care how much you prepare or write or whatever for a speaking engagement, a sermon, a conversation, there's going to be a moment, if you're listening, if you're open, if you're present with that Spirit, that you're going to go, whatever I wrote here, no longer important, right? Or why didn't I write this down? To say it, and it just comes out, right? For me, that's kind of my measure. If I only ever just read what's on the page, where am I at, right? Or was I able to be present in those moments, interject, read the room, hear the Spirit, and say, this is where we're going today, in whatever room that is. And so I think you're right. Peter lays it out there, and he's just fully present in it, right? He's just going for it. I love that.
You know how Shanna knows when the Holy Spirit has a hold of me? She gets tickled about this because it happened. This is the way it happens. I'll have whatever's on my piece of paper here for my sermon. In the moment that it goes into the Bible and I close my Bible, and I always put my hand I always put my hand on it, and then I just go. And I'm not a manuscript preacher, but I know when I'm in that moment, and I think that's where we see this with Peter, and we see we see this moment of what he's reminding them what they're supposed to do, and like he does kind of lay out some next steps of like what's going to happen. Like, we're going to go do these things, and like,
Right.
and he kind of reminds them, like, he does a really good job here. I don't know. I love this. This is probably definitely one of my favorite sermons in the Bible. And he has this line, and you'll see this appear in Acts quite a bit, is the idea of changing our hearts and lives. Peter's really big on this. This is something that Peter really wants us to do. And granted, you tie that to Jesus, you touched on about it. I mean, you can definitely tie it, but like, that's an important thing. And I think that's an important thing for us, is that like, that really, when you think about it, the book of Acts is motivating us to change our lives towards this risen Christ, to live exactly how Jesus did. And that's what's really important. And then everything else, the Spirit and everything else, will take over. And you notice that like, once they agree to accept that Spirit in their lives, man, they do amazing things, and they're not without, and they do just such great work for the kingdom.
Right. Well, and that's, you get later into the back end of chapter 2 here, verse 36. Therefore, let all Israel know beyond question that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, but the Lord, both Lord and Christ. When the crowd heard this, they were deeply troubled, and they said to Peter and the other apostles, brothers, what should we do? And Peter replied, change your hearts and lives. And I think you're right. Peter preaches in such a way that they hear. He preaches, it's a tough message to hear, right? But he preaches it in such a way that they hear and are troubled and say, what do we do? He's not preaching to get likes on Facebook. He's not preaching so that everybody will be happy. He's pushing in a way that the people hear. Often I think we can find ourselves pushing in a way where people don't hear, right? Where it's not productive. But Peter finds that happy medium, right? He finds that zone of, here are the things, here's the prophetic message in a way that people can hear. And the response isn't an email on Monday morning of, hey, I hated what you preached, or why'd you say this thing, or, getting mad and stomping off. It's troubled hearts. And now what do we do? And they do that in community, right? They do that with the relationship that they're building through this. They do that together. And I think they just put all those pieces together, where it's easy for us today to be missing a piece, right? It's somewhere, and it's just not quite clicking. And I think that's what the early church is they come out with such a strong way with the Spirit here that it brings them all together. And I think, I don't know, just that community aspect of it, right? Because that's where we go from here into the rest of the Acts is being in community through the Spirit.
Well, and I think that's where, and I use this word a lot on Sunday, because I think it's the one thing we neglect more than anything, is surrendering to the Spirit. I think far too often we feel the Spirit pushing us and leading us in a direction, and we refuse to surrender to it because we start thinking about, what's this going to do for me, and is this the right thing, could you imagine?
We live in a culture and society that doesn't surrender.
Right.
That's a tough word, right?
Right. And so I think that's like, here they surrender to the Spirit, and then like you look there in verse 41, that people were baptized, and I mean 3,000 people. I mean, could you imagine if 3,000 people showed up to your church and having been to your church, that'd be a little bit more difficult than it would be my church, but I think
find a place for them. Yeah.
Well, can it just be like maybe 150 and then everybody else online? Like, can we just do that right now? Like, I mean,
right.
like just for now, for COVID precautions. But I think that like when we think about this and we think about Acts 2, it's this idea of letting go and allowing God to lead and guide and being fully surrender. God calls us to surrender ourselves. Like, I mean, that's something that Jesus is really adamant about. And here we have that, like, this is modeled, like it's now modeled for us. And I think it's something that we can learn from that doesn't really get preached around Pentecost.
Right. Well, and maybe the conversation today, or the question today, is reclaiming that word surrender, right? that surrendering to the Spirit, especially in this context, I don't think it means what we think it means, right?
Mhm.
Surrendering is being in this fullness of the relationship, being present. And there's some sacrificial nature to it, right? Because anytime we're in relationship with anyone, there's sacrifices. But I think in our mind and today, that word surrender is we got to give it all up and, sell all of our possessions and do all the things and quit our job. But I don't think that's what it's talking about here. I think it's surrendering to that community aspect of we're in relationship together. And so how can we surrender into the Spirit when we're being led to go, here we are, right? And losing that negative connotation of it, in the, oh, I've got to do the suffering part, and surrender is only suffering, right? Where not really. It's this fullness of who we are together with the Spirit that leads us to the next place.
And I think that's where, who are we surrendering to and what are we surrendering to? That's something we can wrestle with
right.
as well.
Which brings us back to that point of when we do that, we become troubled because we're going to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
Surrender means there is that to it. But allow yourself to be troubled in that way, not negatively, but that leads you into that change of heart, that leads you into that next space, together with the Spirit, with the community that you're surrounded with.
So we want to encourage you. We're working through the book of Acts. And so like today we made it through Acts 2, 1 through 42. We're not going to take this chapter by chapter because we'd be doing this forever. So we're going to jump around. And so, but I want to encourage you, like if you've never done this before, I think this is a good practice. Read through the book of Acts because you will find it's just it's a really good read.
It's such a dynamic book.
It really is. And so I would encourage you to do that. There's a lot for you there. And so, do that and follow along with us as we jump around. I don't know where we'll go next week. Who knows where the Spirit will lead us, because we will surrender to the Spirit. Praise the Lord.
Got really Pentecostal on us.
Got a little Pentecostal there. We hit some of our Pentecostal crowd that don't listen to the podcast. And so we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com, where you can find a lot of our great content. You can buy some gear. Just connect with us at beardedtheologians.com and anywhere you can find us in social media. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
First, guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.